At 2 in the afternoon, on an ordinary Tuesday, my wife of 6 years sent me a text that said she needed 1 week to decide whether I was worth keeping. No conversation, no warning, just a countdown, like I was a product she wasn't sure she wanted to buy. She expected me to panic, to beg, to spend 7 days auditioning for my own marriage. Instead, I wrote back 4 words and spent that same week doing something she never once considered: evaluating her right back. By the end of this story, she'll be sitting on our couch, holding signed divorce papers, finally understanding that ultimatums cut in both directions. Stay to the end, because the moment she realizes what her test actually cost her is worth every second.
I was working through quarterly reports at my desk when my phone buzzed with a message that turned my entire day inside out. I need 1 week to decide if you're worth keeping. No setup, no context, just a cold deadline from the woman I'd been married to for 6 years. Most men would have panicked, called immediately, pleaded for a conversation. I read it twice, and something clicked into place instead. She wasn't asking for time to repair anything. She'd started a countdown, like I was a product with an expiration label she wasn't sure she wanted on her shelf. I set the phone face down and finished the report. 20 minutes later, I picked it back up and typed my answer. Take all the time you need. I'll be using mine productively. Her reply came in seconds. That's it? There was no question in there to answer, so I wrote, "What's the question? You've made your position clear." The typing dots appeared, vanished, came back. She was expecting me to fold, to send a wall of messages asking what I'd done wrong and how I could climb back into her good graces. Instead, I opened my laptop and started making changes that were long overdue. First, the joint credit cards. I called the bank and said I needed to remove an authorized user due to separation proceedings. Within 10 minutes, Rachel's access was paused. Then the passwords, streaming, shopping profiles, shared cloud storage. If she wanted to evaluate my worth, she could do it without leaning on my resources while she did. My phone buzzed again. What did you do to the Netflix account? Prioritizing my expenses during your evaluation period. Are you serious right now? Completely. You said you need time to think. I'm giving you a full picture of life without me. The point wasn't revenge. It was clarity. For months, maybe years, Rachel had treated me more like a convenience than a partner. The dinners where she brushed off my opinions mid-sentence. Plans made without checking with me, then annoyance when I already had commitments. The small eye rolls whenever I suggested a date night. That text wasn't random. It was the final step of someone who'd been quietly tallying our marriage like a business deal, calculating whether the benefits still beat the costs. Fine. Now she could run those numbers with actual conditions attached. I drove home that evening feeling strangely calm. Rachel was in the kitchen, arms folded, clearly prepared for the conversation she thought we needed. We should talk. About what? About what you did today. Cutting off my cards, changing passwords. That's pretty extreme. I poured a glass of water and met her eyes. You sent me a message saying you're taking a week to decide if I'm worth keeping. I figured you'd want an accurate picture. It's hard to evaluate someone's value while you're actively using the things they pay for. Color rose into her face. That's not what I meant. Then you should have been more specific. Communication matters in a marriage, or so I've heard. The sarcasm landed. She shifted her weight, realizing this wasn't following the script she'd written in her head. Look, I think we need to figure out whether we're right for each other. Things have been different lately. Different how? You know what I mean. Actually, I don't. But here's what I do know. You sent a message today that treats our marriage like a probation period. You want a week to think about my value? Go ahead, but do it honestly. No shared accounts, no safety net. If you're judging whether I'm worth keeping, you should experience exactly what you'd be keeping, or losing. She waited for me to soften, to admit I was just hurt and acting out. I finished the water, set the glass down, and headed upstairs. Where are you going? To use my time productively, like I said. That night, I researched divorce attorneys. Not a final decision, but a man who understands his own worth doesn't wait around for someone else to confirm it. I bookmarked 3 firms and made a note to call in the morning. The phone stayed quiet the rest of the evening. No apology, no attempt to walk the ultimatum back. When I turned off the lights, something hit me. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not the guy constantly reading her moods and bracing for disappointment. She wanted a week to think. She was about to learn that an evaluation often says more about the evaluator than the person being evaluated. The next morning, I woke before my alarm and went to the gym. Not out of anxiety, because keeping my routine is part of keeping my standards. When I got home, Rachel was at the kitchen table with her laptop open and coffee going cold beside her. "Good workout?" she asked, in that light tone people use when they're fishing for a bigger reaction. "Always is." She closed the laptop. "I think you're taking this the wrong way. When I said I needed time to think, I meant we should both look at where we are. This isn't only about you." I cracked 2 eggs into the pan, back still turned. "Your message said you needed time to decide if I'm worth keeping. Nothing about a mutual review. Just you judging my value." "Don't twist my words. I'm reading what you wrote." I turned around and leaned against the counter. "But since you want an evaluation, what exactly are you evaluating?" That caught her flat-footed. She'd expected defensiveness, or begging for specifics so I could fix things. Instead, I was treating it like the deal sheet she'd handed me. "Well, I mean, we've been growing apart," she said. "You have to admit that." "Growing apart how?" "You're always working late. You don't want to go out with my friends anymore. You've been distant." I nodded once. "The working late part is true. I was promoted to regional manager 3 months ago. You were upset about it, because it meant I'd miss your book club wine night. As for your friends, I pulled back from spending evenings with people who spend the whole night complaining about husbands who aren't there to defend themselves. That's not fair. Neither is being called distant by someone who spent last weekend at her sister's and didn't mention it until the car was halfway down the driveway." The eggs finished. I plated them and sat down across from her. "Look," she said finally, "maybe I didn't phrase the message perfectly. The point is, we need to figure out if this is working." "Sure," I said. "And here's where your evaluation week gets interesting. If you're spending 7 days deciding whether I'm worth keeping, that means you're measuring me against alternatives. So let's make sure you have the facts." I took out my phone and held up a screenshot. "I called the insurance company this morning. If this becomes permanent, you'll need your own policy, roughly $400 a month. I also looked at the mortgage. If we divorce, the house sells unless one of us refinances a loan, and with your part-time income, you don't qualify. Your share of the equity after fees would cover an apartment deposit." "What are you doing?" "Giving you clean data for your evaluation," I said. "You can't judge whether someone's worth keeping if you don't understand exactly what you're keeping. Or losing." She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. This wasn't the version of the week where I spend 7 days auditioning for her approval. "I also moved half of our joint savings into a separate account," I added. "Seemed fair, since you're unsure about keeping our finances together." "You can't just do that." "It's my money too. If you decide I'm worth keeping, we can talk about pooling it again." The blood drained out of her face. Her ultimatum hadn't put her in the driver's seat. It had simply given me permission to stop pretending her uncertainty wasn't already shaping my choices. "This is crazy. I wasn't trying to threaten you." "Then what were you trying to do?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Because the honest answer was simple, and we both knew it. She wanted to manufacture urgency, so I'd chase her the way I did when we first dated. She wanted to feel pursued, chosen. But she'd misread the moment completely. I was trying to have an honest conversation about our relationship. "No, you were trying to put me on probation. Those are different things. Honest conversations happen face to face. Ultimatums get fired off by text from across town." I finished breakfast and rinsed the plate. "I'm heading to work. Take all the time you need. And remember, evaluations run both directions." I grabbed my keys. "Wait," she called after me. "What's that supposed to mean?" I turned and looked at her. Sitting there with her laptop, her coffee, and a carefully planned ultimatum blowing up in her hands. It means a man who knows his own worth doesn't waste time begging other people to see it. He spends his time with people who already do. By Thursday evening, her tone had shifted entirely. She'd moved on to what I recognized immediately as test number 2. I walked in and found her in the kitchen with a man I'd never seen. Tall, mid-30s, expensive watch, and that slick, confident smile men wear when they think they're playing a clever game. "Hey, honey," she said, voice pitched too bright. "This is Marcus from my yoga class. I invited him for dinner since you've been so focused on work lately." The setup couldn't have been more obvious if she'd written it on a card. She wanted jealousy. Me fighting for her attention, cracking under pressure, playing the insecure husband she'd cast me as. He stuck out his hand with a grin that said he understood the game. "Nice to meet you. Your wife's told me a lot about you." I shook it and smiled. All good things, I hope. Though given the week we're having, I'm not sure which story she's been sharing. His confidence flickered. Not the line he'd prepared for. "She mentioned you're in sales." "Regional management, actually. Just promoted." I opened the fridge. "Hope you don't mind keeping dinner simple. I've been handling the grocery runs this week while my wife takes some time to evaluate our relationship." The room went completely silent. She shot me a look that could have stripped paint. I kept my expression easy and polite. He glanced between us, clearly realizing he'd walked into significantly more than a friendly dinner. "Oh, that's fine. Relationships take work, right?" "They do," I said. "Though I've learned some people prefer to outsource that work to other people rather than doing it themselves. Everyone's got a style." She stared at me with a mix of fury and disbelief. This was supposed to be the moment I got territorial, demanded an explanation, proved I cared enough to fight. Instead, I was treating her yoga friend like any other dinner guest while laying her tactics out in plain daylight. "Actually," he said, checking his watch, "I just remembered. I've got an early showing tomorrow." "Don't be silly," I said, filling a pot with water. "You're already here. And my wife put effort into planning this." He looked like he wanted the floor to open up. She finally found her voice. "Can I talk to you in the other room?" "Sure. Make yourself comfortable," I told him. "We'll be a minute." She spun around the second we were out of earshot. "What are you doing?" "Being a polite host. Was that not the plan?" "You're embarrassing me by being honest about our situation." "I thought transparency mattered to you. You did say you needed time to evaluate whether I'm worth keeping." "You can't just tell people that." "Why not? It's true. Unless you've changed your mind about the evaluation week." She opened her mouth, then shut it. Saying yes would admit it was a tactic. Saying no would double down on a move already collapsing. This isn't how it was supposed to go. How what was supposed to go? Dinner with your yoga friend? Or your attempt to make me jealous? Her face went red. "I wasn't trying to make you jealous." "Then why didn't you mention you'd invited someone until I walked in and found him standing in our kitchen? Why the sudden burst of hospitality from someone who's barely cooked a meal in a month?" "Because you've been distant," she said, the words tumbling out faster than she meant them to. "I thought maybe seeing me interact with other people would remind you what you're missing." There it was, the honest answer she hadn't planned to say out loud. "So you invited another man into our house to show me what I'm missing," I said. "During the same week you say you need to decide if I'm worth keeping. Do I have that right?" "That's not... I didn't mean it like that." "He seems like a decent guy," I said. "He's about to realize he was recruited into someone else's relationship drama. That's not fair to him. And it's not fair to me." When we walked back in, he already had his keys in hand. "I really do need to prep for tomorrow. Thank you for the invitation." The door closed behind him. She turned to me, jaw tight. "You humiliated me." "No, I treated your guest with respect and spoke plainly about our situation. If that felt humiliating, it might be worth asking why." I drained the pasta. "Besides, you wanted to evaluate whether I'm worth keeping. You can't do that without seeing how I handle a night like this." She stared at me for a long beat, and I watched the realization move across her face. Every test had flipped back on her. "You're not the same person I married," she said. "You're right. The man you married would have spent this week pleading with you to change your mind. This one knows better." Friday morning brought a new strategy. I found her at the kitchen table with a notepad covered in neat bullet points. The testing energy was gone. This was damage control. "I think we need a real conversation," she said as I poured coffee. "We've been having real conversations all week. Unless you mean one where I pretend your ultimatum never happened." I'll admit I handled it badly. The text, the 1 week thing. I was frustrated and didn't express myself well. What I was trying to say is that we've fallen into a rut. I feel like we've become roommates instead of spouses. "Tell me more about this rut." "You've been working more," she said, checking her notes. "And when you are home, you're on your laptop or those business podcasts." 30 hours of training modules for the promotion, on my own time. The podcasts were investment research, for both of us. "What about the social side?" "Your friends spend entire evenings complaining about their husbands. I got tired of being the only man in the room treated like an underperforming employee." "They don't do that." I took out my phone and scrolled back. Quote, "At least your husband actually listens. Mine just grunts and goes back to his games." Said to you. About me. While I was sitting right there. I heard all of it. Every eye roll, every passive-aggressive comment about men in general that was clearly aimed at one man in particular. And every time you laughed instead of saying anything. She looked down at her notepad, and I watched her realize her prepared talking points weren't going to survive contact with actual records. "But here's what really stands out," I said. "All week you've been testing me. The ultimatum, the yoga friend, the little plays to pull my attention. And not once did you ask what I've been thinking during your evaluation period." "What do you mean?" "You've been so focused on deciding whether I'm worth keeping that it never occurred to you I might be running the same evaluation on you." The rest of the color left her face. "On Wednesday," I said, "I met with 3 divorce attorneys. Not because I decided anything, but because I wanted to understand my options. Turns out, documentation matters." I pulled a folder from my briefcase and set it on the table between us. Bank statements from the new accounts. Screenshots of her messages, including the original ultimatum. Notes from Thursday night. A timeline going back 6 months. "You can't be serious." "Entirely. You wanted a week to decide if I'm worth keeping. I used the same week to decide whether I want to be kept by someone who treats our marriage as conditional." She stared at the folder like it might detonate. "This is insane. I was trying to save our marriage." "No, you were trying to control it. Saving a marriage takes 2 people. What you did was issue an ultimatum and expect me to perform for approval." "I never said you had to prove anything. You told me you needed time to decide if I was worth keeping. What was I supposed to do with that? Sit quietly while you decided my fate?" She was silent, probably seeing for the first time how her actions looked laid out as evidence instead of feelings. "What happens now?" "That depends on you. Your evaluation period ends tomorrow. But here's what you didn't consider. The moment you told me you weren't sure I was worth keeping, you showed me exactly how you see this marriage. A woman who values her husband doesn't put him on probation. She doesn't bring other men into the house to test his reactions." "Are you divorcing me?" she asked, voice unsteady. "I'm prepared to. The papers are drafted. All they need is my signature." Her hands started shaking. "Over one text message? Over 6 years of marriage where my wife apparently believes I need to prove my worth instead of recognizing it." I stood and refilled my coffee. "You wanted a week to decide if I'm worth keeping? Tomorrow's your deadline. But hear me on this. Whatever you decide, I've already made up my mind about what it means to be married to someone who thinks ultimatums are an acceptable tool." "What does that mean?" "It means even if you decide I'm worth keeping, I'm not sure you're worth keeping me." Saturday morning I was drinking coffee and reading when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw her mother's car in the driveway. The cavalry had arrived. I opened the door to find not just her mother, but her sister and her best friend from college. All 3 looked ready for a fight. "We need to talk," her mother announced, sweeping past me. They arranged themselves in the living room like a panel. Rachel came down a minute later, clearly the one who'd assembled this. "We're here because someone needs to talk sense into you," her sister started. "She's been crying all week." "I'm sorry to hear that. Ultimatums tend to be hard on everyone involved. Her mother stepped forward. Marriage is about compromise. You can't threaten divorce every time there's a disagreement. When your daughter sent a message saying she needed a week to decide if I'm worth keeping, was that compromise? She issued an ultimatum, and somehow I'm the one accused of threatening the marriage. Her friend jumped in. I know Rachel. She doesn't mean half of what she says when she's upset. So I should have dismissed a written evaluation of my value as emotional noise? You should have fought for your marriage instead of giving up at the first sign of trouble. I set my coffee down and looked at each of them. Let me ask you all something. If your husband sent you a text saying he needed a week to decide whether you were worth keeping, how would you respond? Her mother's face tightened. That's different. How? Because men don't... They wouldn't. Wouldn't what? I asked. Wouldn't evaluate their wives like a business investment? Wouldn't invite other people into the home during the evaluation period? Wouldn't put their spouse on probation? Silence fell over the room. Her sister glanced at Rachel, clearly sensing missing information. What other people? Her mother demanded. Rachel's cheeks went red. It wasn't like that. She invited a man from her yoga class to dinner on Thursday. Didn't mention it until I walked in and found him in our kitchen. When I asked privately, she admitted she wanted me to see her with someone else, to remind me what I was supposedly missing. Her friend's mouth fell open. You did what? It wasn't a date, Rachel said. It was dinner. During the week you were deciding whether to keep your husband, with a man I'd never met. I looked at the three of them. Would any of you do that to your spouse? Her sister stared at her like she'd grown horns. That's wildly inappropriate. Which brings us to why you're all here, I said. You came to convince me to fight for my marriage, but none of you has asked the basic question. What exactly am I fighting for? Her mother crossed her arms. You're fighting for your wife, your family. Am I? This week my wife treated our marriage like a probation term, tested my reactions by bringing another man into our home, issued an ultimatum by text instead of having an adult conversation, and now she's recruited family to pressure me instead of addressing any of it directly. I gestured toward Rachel. So what exactly am I supposed to fight to keep? A woman who loves you, her mother said, though most of the force had gone out of her voice. A woman who loves me doesn't put me on trial. She doesn't test me with other men. Her friend shifted uncomfortably. Maybe there's fault on both sides. Absolutely, I agreed. I should have called out these patterns months ago instead of hoping they'd resolve on their own. And I should have recognized sooner that someone who treats love as conditional may not be ready for marriage. Rachel finally spoke. That's not fair. I do love you. You love the idea of me, what I provide, what I represent, how you feel when it suits you, but not enough to offer basic respect. That's not true. Then explain the ultimatum. Explain why you brought another man over during that week. She looked around for backup, but her team had started seeing the picture differently. Her sister cleared her throat. I think we should go. This sounds like something you two need to handle privately. Actually, since everyone's here, your intervention isn't necessary. Today is the last day of the evaluation week Rachel requested. I walked to my briefcase and set the documents on the coffee table. All four of them stared like I'd put down something radioactive. These are divorce papers, I said. Complete except for my signature. Whether I sign them depends entirely on the next 24 hours. Her mother had gone pale. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Your daughter asked for a week to evaluate my worth. I used the same week to evaluate what it means to be married to someone who treats our relationship as conditional. I looked directly at Rachel. You have until tomorrow evening to decide whether I'm worth keeping. But understand this. Even if you say yes, I'm not certain you've shown that you're worth keeping me. The room went still. Her support team had arrived ready to shame me into backing down. Instead, they were watching what it looks like when a man simply refuses to beg for basic respect. I think you should all head out. She has serious thinking to do, and she should do it without a crowd telling her that ultimatums are the same thing as expressing feelings. They filed toward the door. Her mother turned back at the threshold. "Marriage is supposed to be forever." "You're absolutely right, which is exactly why it shouldn't be treated like a probation period." Sunday evening arrived carrying the weight of a final chapter. I spent the day the way I'd spent the rest of the week. A run, some reading, a simple dinner. No dramatic speeches, no last-minute campaign to influence her choice. A man who knows his value doesn't lobby for recognition. She moved through the house quietly, like someone walking through a museum of her own life. Every few hours I caught her watching me with an expression I couldn't name. It wasn't the calculating look from earlier in the week. It looked a great deal like fear. At exactly 7, she came into the living room where I was reading. She'd clearly rehearsed this. "I've made my decision," she said, barely above a whisper. I closed the book. "I'm listening." "I want to keep you. I want to keep us." Her voice shook. "I handled everything wrong this week. The text, the ultimatum, inviting Marcus. I was scared we were drifting apart, and I thought if I created urgency, it would remind you what we mean to each other. I know it was manipulative. I was desperate, and desperate people do foolish things." I nodded once. "Go on." "You were right about treating our relationship as conditional. I treated our marriage like something you had to earn, instead of a choice we both made." She drew a shaky breath. "If you'll give me another chance, I'll do better. I'll talk instead of testing. I'll treat you like the husband you are, not someone who has to prove himself." When she finished, the room went quiet. Hope and fear wrestled in her eyes while she waited for my answer to her verdict that I was, in fact, worth keeping. I reached over and picked up the divorce papers that had been sitting on the coffee table since Saturday. She froze as I opened the folder. "I appreciate your honesty, and I believe you mean every word. But here's what you still don't understand." I took out a pen and held it above the signature line. "The moment you sent that message asking for a week to measure my worth, our marriage changed. Not because of the decision you'd eventually make, because of what it revealed about how you see me." The color drained from her face. "Please don't sign those." For 6 years, I believed I was married to someone who chose me. This week, I learned I was married to someone who sees me as a commodity that gets reevaluated periodically. "That's not true anymore. I told you I was wrong." "You realized it when the consequences became real," I said. "What happens the next time you feel insecure? Do I get another evaluation week?" Tears started down her face. "You wanted a week to decide if I was worth keeping. I use the same week to decide whether I want to be kept by someone who thinks that's acceptable." I signed with a steady hand, and I decided I don't. "You can't do this. We can fix it." "No," I said gently, because I wasn't angry anymore. "This isn't the kind of problem promises fix. You don't see me as an equal partner. You see me as someone whose place in your life requires periodic review." I stood and placed the signed papers in her hands. "I'm not angry. I'm not even hurt. I'm just done being married to someone who treats love like a performance review." She clutched them without looking down. "What about everything we built? 6 years, our home?" All of it rested on the belief that we both valued each other without conditions. You've shown me that belief was wrong, at least on your side. I can change. Maybe, but not with me. I want to be with someone who already knows my worth without needing a week to think it over. I started toward the stairs, then paused and looked back. She sat on the couch with the papers in her hands, finally understanding that her evaluation week had backfired in the loudest way possible. For what it's worth, I hope you learn from this. I hope your next relationship is one you don't feel the need to test or put on probation. That's what real love looks like. Choosing a person, then not questioning the choice every time you feel uncertain. What am I supposed to do now? Whatever you decide. You're free to find someone whose worth you don't need to weigh on a schedule. I went upstairs to pack a bag. I'd stay at a hotel while we sorted the logistics. The hard part was already finished. I'd chosen my own value over someone else's uncertainty about it. Behind me, I could hear her crying, the sound of a week-long test costing her the very thing she claimed she wanted to protect. I'd given her exactly what she asked for, an honest picture of life without me. The only difference was that she thought she controlled the outcome. She forgot that ultimatums cut both ways, and that a man who knows his value doesn't wait around for other people to recognize it. He goes where it's already known. As I folded shirts into my bag, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. The quiet kind that arrives when you stop the exhausting work of proving yourself to someone who should have seen it all along. She'd taken her week to think. I'd taken my freedom.
There's a pattern worth naming underneath this story, because it shows up far more often than most people realize. The first thing to notice is the shape of the opening move. An ultimatum delivered by text, with a deadline attached, isn't really a request for change. It's a bid for control. Relationship researchers have a term for this kind of thing. It's a form of coercive leverage, where one partner manufactures instability specifically to make the other person work harder for reassurance. The tell is the format. Genuine concerns get raised face-to-face. Leverage gets deployed from a distance, where the other person can't respond in real time. The second pattern is what psychologists sometimes call a fitness test, behavior designed to provoke a reaction that proves the partner still cares. Inviting another man to dinner unannounced wasn't about the dinner. It was about watching for jealousy, because jealousy would have read as evidence of value. The problem with tests like these is that they only work on someone who's already anxious about losing you. Run them on someone secure, and they don't reveal devotion. They reveal the person running the test. Third, notice the escalation sequence when the tactic fails. First, denial that any tactic existed. Then, reframing. I meant we should both reflect. Then, recruiting third parties to apply social pressure. That progression is common, and it's worth understanding that it isn't usually calculated cruelty. More often, it's panic. Someone who's built their sense of security around being the one who decides tends to escalate hard when that position disappears. Fourth, and this is the part most people miss, remorse that arrives only after consequences land is a fundamentally different thing from remorse that arrives on its own. Her apology was articulate, self-aware, and probably sincere in the moment, but it was triggered by the sight of drafted divorce papers, not by reflection. That timing matters because it tells you what actually produces change in that person. Pressure, not insight. And pressure has to be reapplied every time. Finally, there's what the husband did, which is worth studying regardless of how you feel about his final decision. He didn't argue about feelings, which is unwinnable territory. He responded to the frame he was given. She treated the marriage as an evaluation, so he ran an evaluation. He documented rather than accused. He stayed calm, not as a performance, but as a boundary. Calm, in situations like this, isn't emotional absence. It's the refusal to hand your emotional state to someone who's demonstrated they'll use it as a lever. The lesson underneath all of it is simple enough. Love that has to be re-earned on a schedule isn't security. It's a subscription, and someone else holds the cancel button. The moment a relationship starts running on periodic review, the question stops being whether you'll pass. It becomes whether the review should exist at all.